She walked into her own hotel, and they told her to leave. No one knew she was the CEO. They judged her by her hoodie, not her name. What happened next silenced the room and exposed everything hidden beneath polished smiles. This isn't just a story about power, it's about what dignity looks like when the world refuses to see it. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that reveal what really matters. They say you can tell a lot about a place by the way it greets a stranger. I wasn't a stranger to the Larchmont Charleston. I built it, not brick by brick. No, I hired people for that. But the vision, the floor plans, the curve of the lobby staircase, the candle scent near the elevators, that was all me. And yet, the moment I walked through those doors wearing sneakers and a hoodie, I was invisible. The glass doors hissed shut behind me with that soft vacuum seal sound meant to feel luxurious. Instead, it felt like I was being swallowed whole. The air inside was warm and filtered, touched with lavender and something vaguely citrus. Jazz hummed from somewhere unseen, and the marble beneath my feet reflected just enough light to make my skin look more golden than tired. I didn't pause long. My bag was slung low across my shoulder, hands in my hoodie pocket, heart calm but aware. I walked toward the front desk, eyes scanning the symmetry I'd insisted on. Velvet chairs spaced evenly, brass trim on every corner, chandeliers adjusted to a precise brightness. It looked exactly the way I had dreamed it would. I just didn't expect to feel so unwelcome in my own dream. The front desk clerk looked like he'd stepped out of a hospitality brochure. Mid-20s, crisp navy blazer, hair slicked just so. His name tag read Josh. He didn't look up as I approached, just tapped at the keyboard like he was finishing a symphony. I waited, a full 5 seconds. Then I cleared my throat softly. "Hi, I have a reservation. Last name Ellison." He finally glanced up. Not all the way, not to my face. Just a flick of the eyes like he was checking for trouble. "First name? Mariah." His fingers resumed tapping. Pause. Tap. Backspace. Tap. A slight furrow in his brow. "Nothing under Mariah Ellison," he said flatly. "Try just Ellison," I said. "Or under Ellison Property Group. It should be for the top floor suite." His eyes finally met mine. Just briefly. His tone changed. Not more respectful, just less friendly. "Do you have a confirmation number?" "No, I reserved it internally. You should see a note in the system. It's for the penthouse, suite 1901. Josh gave a tight little sigh, just enough to be noticed. "Without a confirmation number, I can't verify your booking." My jaw tightened. I kept my voice level. "There's a note attached to the file. Please check again." He clicked around a few more times, then leaned slightly toward the screen. "There's a reservation under Ellison Property, but it's for corporate execs, not walk-ins." I let the silence stretch, just for a breath. That's me. A blink, then the smirk. Small. But I've seen it 100 times in my life, and I knew exactly what it meant. His mouth twitched, and he leaned slightly back, reaching under the desk with one hand while keeping his eyes on me. "Just a moment," he said, disappearing into the back. I didn't move. Behind me, the doors opened again. A white couple walked in. Affluent, polished. She had pearls. He had boat shoes. They approached the second clerk, who smiled like he'd known them for years. Keys exchanged hands. Welcome drinks mentioned. Laughter. I watched it all like I wasn't standing 5 feet away. Like I wasn't the one who'd designed the welcome script the other clerk was now using. The door behind the desk creaked open. A man in a security uniform emerged. Tom. Pale skin, crew cut, the type who stood like his spine had been trained by the military. His hand rested near his belt, not on his taser, but close enough to speak volumes. "Ma'am," he said, "is there a problem here?" "No," I said, steady, just checking in. "Gotcha. Just hanging around the desk then?" I didn't bite. "I have a reservation," I said calmly. "I've explained it already." Tom's expression didn't change, but the space between us grew heavier, like he was waiting for a reason to do something, anything. Then the door opened again. A woman this time. Mid-40s, platinum blonde bob, lipstick 2 shades too bold for the hour, clipboard in hand like it was a badge. "Linda, the night manager." "Evening," she said. "I hear there's some confusion." "No confusion," I replied. "Just checking in. The penthouse booked under Ellison Property, arranged under my name, Mariah Ellison." Linda gave a tight-lipped smile. It didn't reach her eyes. "I see. Unfortunately, without prior corporate confirmation, we can't release that suite. Protocol, you understand. I am the CEO, I said. I arranged it myself. She blinked, then asked, "Do you have ID?" I handed over my license and business card. She looked at them for all of 2 seconds before returning them. "You look different than I expected." I tilted my head. "What did you expect?" She hesitated. "We've had impersonation issues before. I'm sure you understand." "No," I said. "I don't." She motioned to the lounge. "Perhaps you could wait over there while we verify." "I'll stand right here." Tom's feet shifted. Josh re-emerged, hovering behind the desk like he didn't want to be seen but couldn't help watching. From the bar, the couple glanced over, whispering behind their glasses. That's when I knew. They weren't confused. They weren't checking protocol. They'd made a decision. I didn't belong. Not here. Not in their idea of what authority looked like. And still I stood. The marble beneath me didn't flinch. Neither did I. I didn't raise my voice, didn't throw out credentials. I let them see me. I let them sit in their own discomfort. Because this wasn't just a test of patience, it was a mirror. And they were about to see exactly who they were when no one was watching. In my pocket, my phone buzzed softly. I answered. "Activate the Charleston file," I said, locking eyes with Linda. "Now." Then I hung up. I placed the phone on the desk like evidence. No more words, no more explanation. I stepped half an inch to the side, giving her room to dig her hole deeper, and silently I waited. Tom didn't say anything right away. He just shifted his stance, feet wider, shoulders squared, like a man preparing for a fight he wasn't sure was coming. But the way his hand hovered near the clip on his belt said he was ready. Just in case. I kept my gaze steady. Not defiant, not meek, just still. I had learned the power of stillness a long time ago. When you grow up in rooms where people expect you to disappear, staying still can feel like rebellion. It tells them, "I see you. I see what you think you know about me." Linda stood beside him now, tapping something into her tablet with clip precision, lips pursed like she was trying to hold in her annoyance, or maybe just the truth. Every movement was too controlled, like a performance given so often she'd forgotten she was acting. Behind the front desk, Josh pretended to be busy. His eyes flicked to the side monitor, then to me, then back to the monitor. A silent panic started blooming across his features. Maybe he was realizing that the situation was slipping from his control. Maybe he was wondering if he'd just pulled the fire alarm in a building he didn't own. I heard the faintest shuffle to my right. A cleaning cart rolled slowly from the staff corridor. Loretta, gray at the temples, brown skin like burnished walnut, uniform crisp despite the hour. She didn't speak, just glanced at me once as she passed. Then, softly, almost like a mother's lullaby, "You just stand still, baby. Let 'em dig their own hole." My throat tightened, not with sadness, with recognition. Loretta didn't need to know my name. She knew what she was seeing. Knew what it meant to stand in the middle of a storm and wait for the wind to change directions. And just like that, she was gone again. Back into the silence that people like her were always asked to live in. Linda turned her attention back to me. "Miss Ellison," she said, with emphasis, as if the name itself was still up for debate. "You understand, of course, that our procedures are in place to ensure the safety and comfort of all guests." I didn't respond. I just let her words hang in the air. Procedures. Comfort. Safety. Funny how those words always seem to serve the people already at ease. She took a breath and tried again. "Surely you can appreciate why we can't just assign the penthouse suite to someone based solely on their word." I looked at her, not through her, and said, "You're not assigning anything. You're releasing a space that was secured under my company's name, for my use. You already have the reservation." She faltered, just a bit. "It's unusual, a CEO booking anonymously." "That was the point," I said. "I wanted to see how guests are treated when there's no clipboard, no title." Linda's jaw clenched. "That sounds like an audit." "I didn't say that, but you are suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm standing here, waiting for the hospitality I built." Her mouth opened, then shut. Behind her, Josh leaned in to whisper something, but she waved him off. The atmosphere had shifted. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Like a crack in a dam, not yet bursting, but you could hear the slow hiss of pressure. The couple from earlier were now seated at the bar. The woman sipped her drink and glanced over. The man leaned in, murmuring something. both of them pretending not to look at me while doing exactly that. That's always how it starts. The quiet murmurs, the shifting glances, people unsure if they should step in or step away. But no one ever chooses to stand beside you, not until they know which way the tide is turning. That's when Pamela appeared. She was small, maybe 5'3", ash-blonde ponytail, blazer slightly too big for her frame. I hadn't noticed her before, an intern I would learn later. She was standing near the side corridor, phone in hand, screen tilted up ever so slightly. Recording. Her eyes locked with mine, wide and uncertain. Not afraid of me, afraid of what she was seeing. And maybe afraid of what it meant if she did nothing. I didn't acknowledge her, just offered the tiniest nod. Then Josh said it, like a trigger pulled. "You sure this is your hotel?" I turned slowly to face him, every muscle in my spine straightening. "I didn't say it was mine," I said. "I said I run it." Josh blinked, but Linda cut in before he could speak. "The reservation came from corporate," she said, her voice growing sharper, "but your name wasn't listed." "It wouldn't be," I said. "I booked it without using my name." "And why would a CEO hide her identity?" she asked, arms crossed now, the mask of civility slipping. "To see how the staff treats someone who doesn't look like a brochure photo." The silence that followed was sharper than any shouted insult. Josh stepped back. Tom's posture stiffened again. Even Linda seemed to falter for a second, caught between professionalism and the realization that she'd said too much to the wrong person. No one moved, no one offered an apology, no one asked me if I wanted a glass of water or a place to sit. Then the lobby doors opened with a whisper of cold air, and a man stepped in. Older, dark skin, rimless glasses, beige overcoat folded over one arm. He paused when he saw me, then nodded slowly, respectfully. "Evening, ma'am," I nodded back. "Good to see you, Harold." He smiled, tired but kind. "I recognize that look," he said. "I had it once. Standing in a hotel like this, wondering if I belonged." "You do now," I said. He glanced around. "My granddaughter just started working here. I came to see how they treat people who look like her." His gaze drifted to the bar, then to the front desk, where Josh had gone utterly still. "Seems I came on the right night." Linda stiffened. She didn't know who he was. Didn't matter. What mattered was that now there were eyes on her. Witnesses. Harold leaned in slightly. "I've been here before. They gave me the wrong room 3 times, then told me it was my fault. I didn't make a fuss. I just left." "But you came back. Maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe you should have stayed," I said. He looked at me then, really looked, and whatever doubt had lingered in the corners of his mind dissolved. "You're doing what I couldn't," he said quietly, and I felt that, like an inheritance, unspoken, but real. Behind the desk, Linda finally broke the silence. "If you'll just give us a few minutes." "No," I said, "you've had time. You used it to doubt me." I reached for my phone again and pressed a button. The voice on the other end answered on the first ring. "This is Ellison." A pause. "Understood." I hung up and set the phone down. "I suggest," I said, looking Linda straight in the eye, "you check the system again." And then I waited, not to be validated, not to be appeased, but to let them see how loud silence can be when it's coming from someone they misjudged. There was something electric about the silence after I hung up that phone. It wasn't peace, it was pressure. Every person in that lobby was feeling it. You could almost hear the weight of assumptions collapsing, slowly, quietly, like a roof caving in under snow. Nobody said a word, but their eyes screamed the same thing. What if she's telling the truth? Linda tried to stand taller, but her clipboard had dropped a few inches. Tom shifted his weight from foot to foot. Arms crossed tighter now. Like that could keep control from slipping through his fingers. Josh looked frozen behind the desk, his fingers hovering over the keyboard like he forgot how letters worked. Me? I didn't move. I let them stew in it. I let the discomfort marinate. I'd learned, over years of sitting through boardrooms filled with men who didn't think I belonged, that there is power in not explaining yourself. There's dignity in stillness. And tonight, in my own hotel, I wasn't going to make myself smaller just to make them feel safe. From the bar, I could feel the couple watching me again. The woman set her glass down with a quiet clink and leaned in to whisper something to her partner. Their glances were sharper now. Less curiosity, more unease. No longer gossiping about the woman in the hoodie, they were starting to realize they might be watching the beginning of a corporate reckoning. Across the lobby, Loretta reappeared. She didn't come forward this time. She lingered by the side, behind the velvet rope near the concierge table. She wasn't pretending to dust anything. She wasn't even hiding. She just stood there, watching. Her presence gave me strength. I don't know how else to describe it. Her eyes were steady, hands folded over the mop handle like it was a staff. She looked at me like she'd been waiting for this moment. Not just tonight, but for years. For someone who wouldn't leave, who wouldn't swallow it and move on. Someone who would plant herself like a monument and dare them to flinch first. I glanced down at the glass of water she'd placed earlier. I hadn't touched it. I wasn't thirsty. That glass wasn't about hydration. It was about principle, about dignity, about the one person in the building who saw me before I had to announce who I was. Josh opened his mouth. So, just to confirm, you're saying you're the CEO of... I cut him off with a glance. Just one look. He stopped. Linda cleared her throat and stepped forward, clipboard tucked tight against her chest like it could shield her from what was coming. Miss Ellison, while we understand your frustration... You don't, I said. She faltered, blinked fast. We are reviewing the information. If you'd be willing to take a seat while we... I said, I'll stand. That hit her harder than I expected. Maybe because I didn't raise my voice. Maybe because the authority in my tone didn't need to be shouted. Linda looked like she wanted to argue but couldn't find a foothold. Instead, she turned back toward Josh and whispered something too low to hear. I scanned the space again. Pamela was still by the side hallway, half shrouded in shadow. I hadn't seen her lift her phone again, but I could tell it was still in her hand. Her fingers flexed around it nervously. When our eyes met, she froze. Then, cautiously, she lowered the device. She stepped forward, hesitant. I'm sorry, she said softly, eyes darting between me and the desk. I shouldn't have been recording. I didn't say anything. I just waited. I didn't know what else to do, she continued. It just didn't feel right. And so you recorded it? I asked. Pamela nodded. Not to post. I swear. She swallowed. I thought maybe someone would need to see it. Loretta's voice came from across the lobby, low and solid. Then keep the record. Everyone turned. Loretta stood there like a statue, unshakable, rooted. She hadn't moved an inch. The truth don't need permission, she said. Pamela looked at her like she'd just been handed a lantern in the dark. But what if it backfires? She asked. Loretta gave her a tired smile. Then at least you'll know you didn't stay silent. The room felt different after that. It was subtle, but it was there. A shift in temperature, in gravity. Like the story had taken a turn, and they could feel it, though none of them could say how. Josh's screen pinged softly. He jumped. He clicked something, stared. His mouth opened, then closed. Whatever he saw, it rocked him. He turned to Linda. Linda? She approached quickly, trying to mask the urgency in her steps. He whispered something to her. Her eyes snapped up, then to me. She turned and disappeared into the back office. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stood there. The thing about justice, it doesn't always come fast. But when it does, it walks in the front door, just like I did. No announcements, no fanfare, just presence. Pamela stepped back, shoulders stiff but straighter than before. Behind her I noticed something. A young woman, barely out of college by the looks of her, stood near the hallway leading to the employee quarters. Pale hair and a tight ponytail, oversized blazer that didn't quite fit. She had a service badge clipped to her blouse, probably food and beverage. She wasn't hiding, she was watching. And I saw the same question in her eyes I'd seen in Pamela's. Is it safe to care? I gave her nothing but a nod. She nodded back, almost imperceptibly. And still, I waited. No more speaking, no more explaining, no more defending. Let them dig, let them run their checks. Let them scramble to explain why the woman they tried to push out was the one who signed their paychecks. Let them realize on their own how badly they'd misjudged me. Loretta moved again, just a step closer. Not to intervene. Just to be there. Josh shifted uncomfortably. Tom pretended to study the exit sign. Pamela glanced at her phone, probably deciding whether to save or delete what she had recorded. I didn't flinch, because I knew what was coming. And this time, I wasn't the one who had to prove anything. I stood there in that lobby, still and quiet, but my mind had drifted backward. Not far, but deep, into the kind of memory that doesn't fade with time, only sharpens. The chandeliers above me reflected perfectly in the polished floor, but I wasn't seeing them. I was seeing flickering fluorescent lights. Tile floors scrubbed so clean they stung your eyes. The kind of place where the smell of bleach lingers in your hair hours after you leave. I was 16 again, pushing a mop through the emergency wing of Brookhaven General Hospital. My mother was there, somewhere around the next corridor, her hair tied back so tight you could see the outline of every bone in her face. Her scrubs never fit, always a size too large because the hospital only stocked mediums and above, and my mother was barely a small. But she never complained, never asked for new ones. She just made them work. That night, the lights buzzed and my feet ached in cheap tennis shoes, soles worn to nothing. I wasn't supposed to be there. I'd lied about my age on the temp form. We needed the money, and Mom didn't ask too many questions when she saw me in that uniform. I remember turning a corner and seeing her leaning over a gurney, gloved hands slick with someone else's blood. She was wiping the railings clean, her movements automatic, tired. She didn't see me at first. Then she did, and our eyes met in the kind of silence that says everything. "You didn't have to come," she said softly. "I wanted to," I lied. The truth was the power had been cut off for 2 days. Rent was past due. The fridge smelled like spoiled milk and something worse. My younger brother had been coughing at night, and we couldn't afford the prescription. That shift, that one night of overtime, meant food in the house, heat, dignity. After that night, I brought my first paycheck home and dropped it into a glass jar taped to the fridge. Someone, maybe my brother, had written on it in Sharpie, "Own something." I remember looking at that jar every morning before school thinking, that's it. That's the goal. Not wealth, not fame, ownership, security. To never mop another floor unless it was mine. And now here I was, standing in the marble lobby of a hotel I built, waiting to be recognized as more than the help. Waiting to be seen. But memory doesn't stop at 16. It races ahead, skips like stones across water. Age 24. I was working at a roadside motel off I-85 in Georgia. No air conditioning, carpets with cigarette burns. A drunk guest once snapped his fingers at me and called me girl, like I was a house pet. Another said, "You clean well for someone like you." The manager laughed. I didn't. I just folded sheets and kept moving. At 26, I landed an interview for front desk manager at a boutique hotel in Miami. I was so excited I could barely sleep the night before. Wore my best suit, charcoal with a pearl blouse, and rode 2 buses and walked 7 blocks in heels that chewed my ankles raw. The general manager had a fake tan and a thinner-than-necessary smile. "You're very articulate," he said after flipping through my resume. "But we're looking for someone who matches the aesthetic." I knew exactly what he meant. I thanked him, smiled politely, and walked out slowly so he wouldn't see my hands shaking. He never knew that I went back to my cousin's apartment that night and cried into a towel so my sobs wouldn't wake anyone. He never knew I spent the next 3 months rebuilding, taking online classes, shadowing industry vets, watching YouTube videos on boutique hospitality trends until my eyes ached. By 30, I was managing 3 properties. By 32, I had acquired my first distressed hotel and flipped it for double. By 35, I was CEO of the Ellison Group. 6 hotels, 3 cities, and a portfolio strong enough to get calls returned by the kind of people who used to ignore me. But no matter how high I climbed, I knew this. Some people would only ever see the girl in the lobby, not the woman who built it. The irony, of course, is that I made this lobby, designed every inch. The velvet chairs, the backlit menu board behind the concierge, the scent diffusers hidden in the baseboards, all mine. I had signed off on everything from the chandelier wattage to the jazz playlist. And yet tonight, none of that mattered. Josh had seen sneakers, not stature. Linda had seen my skin tone, not my credentials. Tom had seen a possible problem, not a paying guest, and all of them acted accordingly. Still, I didn't move. Through the wide front window, Charleston's nightlights blinked softly. Delicate halos of orange and gold draped over historic brick. The streets outside had a kind of hush to them, a gentle quiet you only find in southern cities just after a rainstorm. That smell of wet earth and jasmine was in the air, same as it had been when I first toured this lot before construction even began. I had stood in that empty shell of a building, wind blowing through rusted scaffolding, and pictured everything it would become. I didn't imagine this, though. I didn't imagine having to stand in the lobby of my own success and justify my presence to people who worked for me. But maybe that was the final test. Not the empire. Not the acquisitions. Not the magazine feature in Hospitality South with my face in soft focus and the headline redefining elegance. No. The real test was whether I could stand here, in front of the very people who underestimated me, and stay rooted, stay dignified, stay silent. Because silence, when you own it, can echo louder than rage. Harold hadn't moved far. He stood to the side now, eyes on me like a witness. His presence meant something more than backup. He was a reminder. This wasn't just about me. It was about every man and woman like us who had been told, in 100 subtle and loud ways, you don't belong here. Well, I did. I belonged more than anyone else in this building. And when the system they'd clung to finally cracked, when names were verified, when files were pulled, when phones started ringing in corporate offices, I wouldn't need to raise my voice to prove it. They'd hear me anyway. Josh's screen pinged again. It was a subtle sound, just a soft digital chime, but in that heavy, watching silence, it cracked like thunder. He flinched. I didn't look at the screen. I watched him instead. Watched the way his mouth twitched, how his fingers hesitated above the keyboard, how his chest barely rose on the inhale. He clicked, read, blinked. Then he turned to Linda, and his voice cracked slightly under the weight of his own nerves. Linda, you need to see this. She was back at the desk now, clipboard still pressed to her chest like it could protect her from a bullet. She leaned in, listened to whatever Josh whispered, and her eyes did something I'd seen before, something dangerous. They didn't widen in surprise, they didn't narrow in apology. They sharpened, like glass. Then, without a word, she turned and disappeared into the back office again. I knew what that meant. The notification had landed. The system had updated. My name was no longer in question. Now it was about scrambling, about optics, about narrative, about covering tracks. But none of that was my concern anymore. My job was done the moment I placed the call and stood still. Pamela shifted from the side of the lobby, inching closer. I felt her presence before I saw her, nervous but firmer than before. She came to a stop a few feet from me, clutching her phone like it might burn her. I wanted to say, she began, voice thin but steady, thank you for not walking out. I turned slightly. Why would I walk out of my own building? She smiled, small and apologetic. Most people would have. After how you were treated. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at her, really looked. She couldn't have been more than 22. Still had the softness of someone new to the world. Still figuring out when to speak, when to duck. But there was something under her fear, steel just beginning to forge. You were filming earlier, I said. Not accusing. Just fact. Pamela swallowed. I didn't know what else to do. And now? I still don't know, she whispered. I'm just an intern. I'm not supposed to. Loretta's voice cut in from behind us. You don't need to be anything to do the right thing. She was standing there again, mop in one hand, the other resting gently on her hip. Her posture wasn't casual. It was intentional, anchored. Pamela turned to her. But if I send it in, if I speak up, what if they fire me? Loretta's smile was tired and proud all at once. Then they never deserved you in the first place. There was a silence after that, this one different. Not heavy, not hostile. It was full of breath, possibility, like something that had been tight for too long was just starting to loosen. Pamela looked down at her phone again. Her thumb hovered over the screen. For a second, I thought she might delete the footage, bury the truth to save her internship. But she didn't. Loretta watched her, then stepped closer to me. You good, baby? I nodded. You let them dig their hole deep enough, she said. Behind the desk, Josh was typing again. Not like before. This wasn't idle motion anymore. It was frantic. His jaw clenched, his shoulders rising higher with every breath. He kept glancing toward the hallway. Linda had disappeared down. Like he wanted to run but didn't know where to go. Then, as if something clicked in his mind, he pushed away from the counter and walked toward Loretta. She watched him come, her eyes unreadable. Loretta, he said quietly, not meeting her gaze. Can I talk to you for a second? She said nothing. Just raised her eyebrows slightly, waiting. He lowered his voice, barely more than a whisper. Did you think I meant to be that way to her? Loretta didn't answer immediately. She just stared at him. The seconds stretched, and he squirmed. I didn't know who she was, he added quickly. I wasn't trying to insult her. That's the problem, Loretta said finally. You didn't know, and you acted like you did. Josh blinked. You looked at her, Loretta continued, voice still soft but razor sharp, and decided in 3 seconds, wrong outfit, wrong skin, wrong kind of important. He flinched. She's the reason you have a paycheck, she said. And she stood there polite, patient, calm, and you treated her like a code to crack, like a risk to manage. His throat worked, like he wanted to explain, but she didn't let him. Intent don't erase impact, son. Josh lowered his head. You still got time to learn, Loretta said, but it starts with owning the mess, not pretending it didn't happen. She turned and walked away, mop dragging slightly behind her like punctuation. Josh stood in the middle of the lobby, alone and burning with something he couldn't name. I saw it, though, that flash in his eyes. Not shame, exactly. Not yet. Just recognition. The start of it. That was enough, for now. Outside, I saw a car pull up through the glass. Black sedan. The passenger door opened and 2 men stepped out. One tall, broad-shouldered navy overcoat, the other leaner in a dark suit with a Bluetooth earpiece already in place. William Langston. Julian Barrett. The moment their shoes touched the marble, the air changed. It cracked like static. Josh straightened. Tom's arms dropped from his chest. Pamela's breath hitched. Even the jazz track seemed to fade. I didn't move. I didn't need to. William saw me and gave one nod. Just one. You guessed. I held his gaze. I stayed, I said. They didn't. Julian stepped forward, already removing a folded document from his folder. We sent the audit notice 2 weeks ago, he said. Told every property you might arrive incognito. Looks like they missed the memo, I replied. Tom shifted uncomfortably. Josh said nothing. Linda had not yet reappeared. Julian laid the document on the counter, smooth and deliberate, then turned to Josh. You all had one job. Treat everyone like they mattered, especially when you think they don't. No one responded. I looked around the room, at the polished floor, the dim chandelier light, the pristine velvet furniture meant to signal elegance. It all looked the same, but nothing felt the same. And somewhere, deep inside that silence, they knew it too. Linda finally emerged from the hallway. Her steps were quick at first, but faltered as soon as she caught sight of William and Julian standing by the front desk. She froze for half a second, enough time for the weight of recognition to settle across her face. Her clipboard dipped slightly, like her arm had suddenly forgotten its purpose. Her eyes darted between them, then to me, and for the first time all evening, I saw something real in her expression. Fear. William didn't move. He just spoke, voice calm, commanding. Manager Linda Ford? She cleared her throat. Yes. He didn't ask for confirmation. He wasn't here for questions. Why is our CEO standing outside her own lobby, being questioned by security and denied access to her suite? Linda opened her mouth. The reservation wasn't confirmed, and she gave you her name, Julian cut in. She showed ID, William added. She booked it under corporate, Julian said, sliding a second document onto the counter. Same as every executive in the company. Linda's face was flushing now. We've had impersonators before, I thought. You didn't ask for confirmation, I said. You asked me to step aside. You summoned security. You made me feel like a trespasser. William stepped forward slightly. We're not here to debate, Linda. We're here to document failure. Yours. Josh had gone ghost pale behind the desk. Pamela was frozen near the wall, her phone back in her pocket, fingers clenched tight around it. Julian set the printed memo flat against the counter. The header was bold. It bore our logo. You all had one job, he repeated. Treat every guest like they mattered, especially the ones you assume don't. I turned toward Linda. Her jaw was clenched, her breath shallow. Her clipboard was shaking in her hand. You thought I didn't belong, I said. You looked at me and saw a mistake. She had no answer. I didn't need one. The silence had turned heavy again, only now it pressed down on them. Dylan, Josh's real name, which I'd always known, stood stiff behind his monitor. I could feel the conflict unraveling behind his eyes. Every second that passed was making it worse for him. Not because he was guilty of a grand offense, but because he was beginning to understand the depth of the small ones. Julian stepped toward the main screen behind the desk and pulled out a small tablet. He tapped a few times, and suddenly the security monitor blinked to life. A paused frame filled the screen. Me standing at the counter, Dylan leaning slightly away, Tom standing stiff, one hand hovering near his belt. Julian pressed play. Voices rang out, too clear, too sharp. Linda's tone clipped, Dylan's disbelief, Tom's cold questions. There was no distortion, no excuses. Just the truth, laid bare like a confession under a spotlight. No one moved. It played for only 30 seconds, but the silence that followed could have filled an hour. Pamela took a small, trembling step forward. "There's more." Julian turned to her. "What do you mean?" "I recorded it," she said, pulling out her phone again. "From the side, I couldn't let it slide." William gave one small nod. "Send it to my office. Now." Linda's voice cracked. "You're seriously going to use footage from an intern?" I didn't let William respond. "I'm going to use the truth," I said. "I don't care whose hands it comes from." Linda's defenses were rising now, her posture rigid, her voice faster. "We were just doing our jobs." "No," I said, voice cool as ice. "You were doing your version of the job, the version that excludes anyone who doesn't fit the brochure." Dylan looked up, panic blooming behind his eyes. "Are we fired?" "Not yet," Julian answered. Linda turned toward William, voice tight. "I've been with this company for 11 years. One exposed night," I said, "doesn't erase 11 years, but it reveals which parts you've been hiding." Tom took a quiet step back. He said nothing. He didn't need to. I turned to Loretta, still standing off to the side, with her mop resting like a walking stick. "You knew," I said. She nodded slowly. "I've worked here since the ribbon cutting. Yes, I've seen people turned away for less. But I stayed because I thought maybe it would change." I nodded. "Maybe tonight's the start." Outside the conference room, just beyond the glass, Harold stood with his granddaughter, Imani. She wore her uniform neatly, her name tag slightly crooked, her expression tense. She didn't speak, but her eyes were wide, watching everything. "She saw it all," Harold said softly when I stepped over. I studied her, this young woman who looked too small for the weight she was carrying. Her voice came out barely a whisper. "I thought if I said something, they'd send me home." "What's your name?" I asked. "Imani," she said. "You like working here, Imani?" I did, until I saw how they treated you. And how quiet everyone stayed. I saw the tears behind her eyes, but I also saw something else. Resolve, raw and new. "You don't need their silence," I said. "You need your voice." "I don't want to lose this job," she whispered. "Then do it better than they ever expected. And never forget what silence looks like, so you never wear it." Harold's hand came down gently on her shoulder. "Last night," he said to me, "I didn't speak because I thought I didn't matter. She reminded me I do." I smiled faintly. "So speak now. Every time it counts." I turned back to the lobby, and Pamela stepped up beside me. She didn't look nervous anymore. She looked ready. Julian checked his tablet again and nodded. "Time." And just like that, we moved toward the conference room. No drama, no applause, just footsteps echoing across tile, cutting through the remnants of a silence that would never sound the same again. Because they weren't just witnesses now, they were participants, and the reckoning had begun. The staff conference room wasn't built for reckonings. It was small, utilitarian, gray carpet, beige walls, a single long table in the middle with a projector screen pulled down like a blank canvas, waiting for truth to be painted on it. This room had seen onboarding sessions, supplier calls, maybe a birthday cake or two. But it had never seen what was about to happen today. I walked in first, not because I had something to prove, but because it was mine. My company, my room, my people, even if they had forgotten that the night before. Julian was already inside, setting up the projection. William stood by the window, arms folded, face unreadable. Pamela slipped in behind me quietly and took a seat in the back corner, folding her hands in her lap, her phone face down beside her like a sealed envelope. One by one, the rest of the staff filed in. Some came with guarded eyes, some couldn't meet mine. Dylan walked in last, shoulders drawn tight, his blazer slightly wrinkled. He didn't sit near anyone. I didn't sit either. I stood at the front of the room, hands at my sides. The silence was dense, not awkward, expectant. Heavy with what they knew they couldn't avoid. "You all know who I am now," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. But last night, most of you didn't, and how I was treated proved that it didn't matter. There were no murmurs, no heads shaking in disagreement, just stillness. I came here without announcement for a reason, I continued. Not to catch you off guard, but to see the version of this hotel you show when no one with a clipboard is watching. Julian clicked the remote. The projector flickered to life. Still images appeared, one after another. Me at the front desk, Dylan leaning away, Linda's crossed arms, Tom's hovering posture, all captured from security footage. Frozen moments that told a story louder than words. This wasn't a one-time mistake, I said. This was muscle memory, an instinct rooted in assumption. If it happened to me, it could happen to any guest who doesn't look like the brochure. The room remained quiet, but I saw something change in a few of them, a shift. Not all, but some. We talk a lot about standards, hospitality, professionalism, but none of that matters if it falls apart the moment a guest doesn't match your expectations. William stepped forward. As of this morning, he said, Linda Ford has been placed on indefinite suspension pending investigation. Security personnel are being rotated out for retraining. He paused. Dylan will enter a 30-day probation period and complete mandatory bias and professionalism training. There was a soft gasp from one of the back rows. Dylan closed his eyes for half a second, then nodded once, tightly. All staff, William added, will undergo bias, diversity, and sensitivity training, effective immediately. The weight of those words dropped like an anchor into the room. I raised a hand before anyone could speak. This isn't punishment for asking questions, I said. It's accountability for how you ask them and why. I turned to Pamela. She blinked, surprised to be called into the center of the room. Last night, I said, you recorded what happened. Not for attention. Not for drama. For truth. That's integrity. A flicker of pride crossed her face, chased by fear. That's why Pamela has been offered a position beyond her internship, I continued. If she accepts, she'll work directly with my office on guest experience auditing across all Ellison properties. The surprise in the room was visible. Pamela's mouth parted slightly, but no words came. She nodded once. Then Loretta cleared her throat gently. I turned. She hadn't sat down either. Ma'am, she said softly. If I may, I nodded. I've worked here since the doors opened, she began. Seen staff come and go, seen good people get tired, seen tired people get careless. She looked around the room. Not to shame anyone, but to speak truth. But last night I saw something I ain't seen in a long time. I saw someone stand their ground without raising their voice. And for the first time in years, I felt proud to wear this uniform. The room didn't break into applause. It didn't need to. It just listened. Julian stepped forward. This isn't just a reset, it's a reckoning. He turned toward the room, voice clipped but firm. From this point forward, every employee across the Ellison Group will be reminded, your bias is your liability. Some heads dropped, others lifted. I scanned their faces, ones I'd seen in hiring reports, team-building events, but never like this. Some were ashamed, some were quietly nodding, understanding that last night had revealed something they hadn't wanted to see. I didn't come here to fire people, I said. I came to see if the culture we built had roots. Turns out some of it still needs watering. I stepped back. William moved forward again. Mandatory debriefings start at noon. Training begins at 2. This hotel will operate, but not unchanged. And with that, it was done. I didn't need a dramatic closing, no final words. The truth had already been laid bare. As we walked out, Pamela a few steps behind me, I felt a shift in the air. A quiet steel returning to the building. A pulse. Downstairs, Dylan stood behind the front desk again. Straighter, paler, but present. I caught his eye as I passed. He didn't look away this time. He nodded, barely. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Pamela followed, shoulders set. Her phone was still tucked into her pocket, but she no longer gripped it like a shield. Loretta rolled her cart across the marble floor, head high. She didn't need to speak. Her nod said enough. And for the first time that day, I smiled. The conference room was quiet now, the chairs pushed back, the projector cooling with a low hum. A silence remained, but it wasn't the silence of tension anymore. It was something heavier, reflective, like truth still lingered in the air, unsure of where to settle next. I stood alone at the head of the table, fingertips tracing the condensation ring from my untouched glass of water. The mark disappeared slowly under my hand, evaporating like the resistance that had tried to hold its place the night before. But it wasn't gone. Not really. Just absorbed into something larger. I didn't need more meetings. I didn't need anyone to pat me on the back. What I needed, what I always needed, was clarity. I stepped out into the hallway, my heels echoing on the tile with the rhythm of resolve. Julian was waiting near the elevator bank, tablet tucked under his arm, posture straight but gaze soft. "You sure you want to do this part personally?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He didn't push. Downstairs, the lobby had changed again. Not the design, not the furnishings. Those were still perfect, still curated to make people feel like they were stepping into something elevated, refined. But the people, they had shifted. Guests moved quietly. Staff walked more deliberately, like they were aware now that eyes were always watching, and not just from cameras, from each other, from themselves. Linda sat on the far side bench, hands clasped tight in her lap, clipboard gone. Her back was straight, but it wasn't pride that held her upright. It was the stiffness of consequence. Dylan stood behind the desk, not hunched, not slouched. His spine was taut, his eyes alert, not with fear, not yet with redemption, but with acknowledgement. Tom leaned against the wall in the back corner, arms no longer crossed, radio silent. His posture had lost its authority. Now it just looked like a man unsure of what to say when the script runs out. I stepped into the center of the lobby, not with a flourish, just presence. One step, then another. Everyone, heads turned, postures straightened. Some flinched, most didn't. "What happened last night wasn't new," I began. "It wasn't rare, it wasn't even unexpected, and that's what makes it dangerous." I turned to Dylan first. "You didn't see me," I said clearly. "You saw a problem." Then to Tom. "You didn't assess the situation. You sized up a stranger." Finally to Linda. "And you didn't enforce policy, you enforced bias." She blinked fast, lips parting as if to speak, but she didn't. "I didn't come here to embarrass you," I continued. "And I didn't come to punish. I came because this company was built on something I refused to compromise." I stepped closer to the desk, past velvet chairs and polished brass. Respect. Pamela appeared quietly from the hallway, standing at the edge like she didn't want to interrupt, but she belonged now. She knew that. Loretta joined her a moment later, hands damp from cleaning but eyes sharper than ever. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. "I didn't need you to know who I was," I said. "I needed you to treat me the way you would anyone else." The fact that it didn't happen means we failed, not just as employees, as people. William stepped in silently, taking his place by the far pillar like punctuation. Julian stood by the glass doors, calm and steady. I turned back to the desk. "If you need a name tag, or a suit, or a title to offer someone dignity, you're in the wrong line of work." No one argued. They didn't need to. The silence was finally the right kind. "This lobby doesn't need to remember my name," I added. "It needs to remember this moment, because how you treat someone when you think no one is watching, that's who you really are." And then I walked past the desk. Pamela stepped aside. Loretta gave me a single nod, quiet, firm, proud. I didn't smile, but I walked taller. The hotel returned to motion, but it didn't return to normal. Not quite. The air hadn't softened. It had sharpened. I walked to the community board near the elevators, normally a place for staff schedules, menu changes, vendor memos. It was cluttered with laminated sheets and taped notices. I pulled a folded envelope from my coat pocket. Inside was a single sheet of ivory paper. No letterhead, no logo. Just 12 centered words. "Don't just train them to serve, teach them to see people." I pinned it to the board. No one saw me place it. That wasn't the point. I stepped back, looked at it for a beat longer than necessary, then turned and walked toward the cafe. The morning crowd was beginning to settle in. Business travelers tapping laptops, couples chatting over pastries, staff prepping trays in the back. I passed them without disruption. No more to fix. Nothing left to confront. I wasn't checking anything now. I was absorbing. That night, back in the suite, I didn't unpack. I didn't turn on the television. I sat at the desk, opened my laptop, and stared at the blank document for a long time before I typed, "Dear Mama." Tonight, I stood still. I didn't yell. I didn't plead. I didn't convince. I let them decide what I wasn't and then waited for them to see how wrong they were. My fingers paused. Then I typed again, slower. "You told me once that silence can cut deeper than noise. You were right. But tonight, the silence didn't just cut them. It cut me too. It's exhausting, Mama. Carrying composure like armor, smiling so they don't call you bitter, calming your voice so they don't call you angry, standing your ground so they don't think you're weak, walking into rooms you built, still having to prove you belong. I stopped. Closed the laptop. Didn't save it. It wasn't meant to be sent. It was meant to be said, to myself, to the memory of a woman who raised me to rise, even when no one offered a hand. Outside the window, Charleston's skyline blinked beneath the hush of morning, the city pretending nothing had happened while the air still remembered. And me? I stood again. Still here. Still standing. Still seen. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this story. If you're still here, it means something in this journey touched your heart. And for that, I'm truly grateful. This story wasn't just about a hotel or a mistake. It was about dignity, about what happens when people make assumptions, and what it takes to stand tall in silence when the world tries to shrink you. The truth is, you don't need to raise your voice to make yourself heard. Sometimes the most powerful statement is simply refusing to step aside. So, wherever you are, whoever you are, remember this. Treat people with respect, not because of who they are, but because of who you are. That's the real mark of character. Now, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. Let's connect. And if stories like this resonate with you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, real-life tales that challenge the way we see the world. You matter. Your voice matters. And you're always welcome here.